Hi, my name is Kevin Murray. I'm speaking to you from Naarm, Melbourne, whose traditional owners are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay respect to their elders, past and present, and the ancestors of the lands where you come from. And today, now with your permission, we will share our learnings over the course of the next hour. Hosted on the Garland platform, the Reinventing the Wheel series is an initiative of the Knowledge House for Craft, an association of thinkers and makers that aims to reflect the global diversity of our field, a field that includes not just the more individual model of craft as art, as might be found in the West, but also the collective model of craft as tradition that might be found in the East. Both are equally valid. Each of these talks becomes a spoke in the wheel, a growing repository of craft knowledge. And I wish to acknowledge my colleague who's with us here from the Knowledge House, Lokesh Gai, and inspired by the discourse of our Tongan colleagues, we call on Lokesh Gai to make a salutation, to put us in the right frame of mind. Lokesh Gai has written very elegantly about traditional men's attire, particularly through his own experience of making it himself for Garland and other publications, and he seems the perfect person to offer a salutation for us to begin. Lokesh, would you mind doing the necessary?
Thank you. So we are very lucky to have Dr. Toolika Gupta, Director of Indian Institute of Craft and Design. So what we wear matters. Namaste, a very warm welcome. To present her book, Toolika would talk about the influence of British Raj, what seemed to be distinctively a Persian costume, and we'll know more about it. It's a very interesting area of history and matters to us uh, all across the world. So over to you, Toolika. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lokesh. And I'm very pleased that we can have Toolika with us. She's director of the Indian Institute of Craft and Design. She has a master's in textiles and clothing from Lady Irwin College in Delhi University in 1996, and a PhD in the history of arts in dress and textiles from the University of Glasgow, which I believe is the subject that she'll be sharing with us today. And she's also one of the 13 founder members of the Society of Textiles and Clothing Research Centre in India. But I'm especially grateful for her because she wrote a beautiful piece for Garland to commemorate our Year of the Lotus. This year is the year of this magnificent and quite mystical flower that is so important, particularly in the Eastern Hemisphere. And she wrote about the way in which it's rendered through much craft and design. And now this talk is going to be very interesting because it resonates with previous talks that we've had in this series, particularly Kamya Sharma's talk about the nivi, the particular fold of the sari that had become a part of the sort of national dress of India, particularly in the independence period, and also Arti Kolra's talk, which looked at the role of craft in India in response to colonization, which should be very interesting. So to hear about the Sherwani, this particular very interesting men's attire that seems to have very strong Persian roots, but has a very different kind of story to it, which tells us a lot about the way in which fashion and clothes respond to the historical conditions in India today. It's my very great pleasure to allow Toolika Gupta or Dr. Toolika Gupta to share her learnings with us now. Thank you very much, Toolika.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kevin. And I'm really grateful to you for inviting me here to share my thesis, to share the work. And this book is an outcome of my research done in Glasgow. Can I share screen? Please let me know if it's visible.
That's great.
Hello.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So with that, I start this discussion. As you rightly pointed out, that it looks very Persian in origin. And, in India, a lot of people thought that this is a result of the Mughals, Mughal influence on our clothing. So I'll take you bit by bit, to how I started researching on it and what came of it and so on. In this picture, you can see the Nizam of Hyderabad taking center stage. He's the 7th Nizam. Yes, so what we know of the Sherwani today is something like this. Today, everybody, at least in the Indian subcontinent, treats it as the traditional Indian menswear. It's called traditional Indian menswear. It's worn for weddings. The groom wears it. His family wears it. Other male friends, members, everybody, is either in the Western suit or in the Sherwani. And more often than not, everybody started wearing the Sherwani. And also, what we notice that it is a garment always worn by the President of India, if the president is a male, on all formal occasions, and by the Prime Minister. And, so there's this strange thing about this garment being called traditional Indian. But when we look at, say, Mughal miniature paintings and the paintings of the time period, we do not see this garment at all. And so how did this become the traditional Indian garment? Where did it come from? When did it come into being? Were some of the questions that I thought need to be answered. Because what is tradition after all? When we start talking about tradition, how old is tradition? Have we created the tradition recently, or has it been there for a long time? So these were the questions. And then the next question was, in none of the miniature paintings we see the Sherwani. And yet a lot of people, when you talk to a lot of people, I spoke to, I think, multiple, educators, academics, and people from different areas, and most of them thought that it was a Mughal garment. But then there was no evidence of its presence during the Mughal rule. And so I thought, probably, was it there before the Mughals? It did not look like that. So then I started trying to unearth, where was it? What was the timeline? Where do we see Sherwani coming in? And how does it become traditional? So it is not there in the 18th century, 19th century. We don't really get to see it. And thus began this search for the Sherwani. Now, here is a picture. It is in the National Archives of India. It hangs on one of the walls. And this is a picture of all the Indian princes in about 1941. So all of them had come to Delhi for a meeting. And what you see is that most of them are wearing this garment. Some of them call it achkan, some of them call it Sherwani. Though, of course, there's a subtle difference, as I got to know while reading about it, but it is a term which was used by a lot of people. And let me tell you, a lot of people use the terms interchangeably, achkan and Sherwani. And so here we see that everybody, each prince sitting here has a Sherwani. Their headgears are different. They're all wearing their headgear that belongs to that particular state. And so religion, state, a variety of different things that have influenced the headgear. And we see British, or rather European, foreign shoes and pajamas, which are more trouser-like, not very loose in nature. So this is the kind of, these are the kind of photographs we see very often in the 20th century. And it's always attributed to us, who look, they're all wearing this traditional garment. That's how India looks at it. So now, who do you see as the fashion figure here? Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who becomes India's first prime minister after India gains independence in 1947. What I have here is a picture of Pandit Nehru wearing a Sherwani, or achkan, as he would call it. And another picture here is an achkan or a Sherwani belonging to him, which I took from his residence museum, where it is. He would always use a small rose flower on one of the buttons, and he wore it like that. So then again, the question is that we see a lot of hand painted, very colorful or embroidered sherwanis, and then we see these very serene white, black, brown kind of sherwanis, off white. So where does it come from? Who does it belong to? And now looking at, so I took the case study of different rajas of the country, raja meaning kings of India at that time. Here you can see two images. These are both, they have been kings of Jaipur. And the first picture that you see here is a photograph around the 1930s of Maharaja Savai Man Singh II, who was the last Maharaja of Jaipur before Jaipur sort of became a part of the Indian Union and India was created as a country. Incidentally, the British could never rule Rajasthan. They were just friends with the rulers of Rajasthan. Similarly with Hyderabad. So it was much later when India got united that these princes and kings, they gave up their land to the country, India, to build a strong country. And here you see him wearing a Sherwani or Rajkan. And then the picture next to it is of Maharaja Savai Man Singh I. Now, he was the one who was during the period of Mughal rule when Akbar was the king. And I've taken him specifically because a lot of people know about Akbar as the Mughal ruler. And he was just next to Akbar. And this is the kind of attire that we see. We do not see Sherwanis. We do not see any kind of tailored, fitted garments the way Sherwani is. So that was just a glimpse of the 17th century. So let's go back and try and understand what people wore in the 17th century. What did Indians wear and what did British wear? And I'm talking about 17th century because in the year 1600, East India Company was formed. And the traders began to come to India in search of spices and cotton. And I'm sure everybody's aware of all that history. So in the year 1600, if we stick to that year, there was Queen Elizabeth I in England and Akbar in India. Akbar ruled this huge country called India, and the land varied from, it was a huge topography. And the people came from East India Company. They came here in order to trade. And when they come here, they continue to wear their clothes and they see the Indian clothes. And there are distinctly different style of dressing up of both of them. What do Indians wear? The Indians wear a jama, which is this garment that you see here, the Indian man wearing. So it's, and I'm just talking about elite Indian men because that's where the Sherwani develops. And so I just stick to that right now. So this is what they wear. They wear a jama. A jama is kind of a garment which is tied. There are no buttons. It is tied with strings. And it could be on the left side or right side, depending on religion, etc. And then there is a pajama. Pajama means a clothing for the legs. Pai means legs. So which ultimately becomes pajama is what we call it today. So it's a pajama. And then there is a jama on top. And then there is a waist belt called the patka here, and their headgear and footwear. So this is how the Indian elite dressed. The most common article of clothing was the jama and the pajama. And on top of them, sometimes they wore a loose coat, something like that I'm wearing today, but it did not have buttons. It was just like a coat on top. There was no concept of front placket. We do not see that concept here. And incidentally, we see this very interesting overlap, which probably led to the kind of gowns that people wear in the West. And what do we see of the elite men in Europe? They wear completely a different set of clothes. They have breeches, they have, boots, and there's a ruff, the collar. There is this concept of doublet or doublets. And it's a very different kind of dressing sensibility. And Edward Terry, who came to India in the 17th century, writes that the air in that place is so hot to us English that we should every day be stewed in our own moisture, but that we stir very little in the heat of the day and have clothing about us as thin as we can make it. So they used to wear woolen clothes, but they look at the fabric here. Some of them try to use that fabric. That is the maximum they would go to. But they continued to wear their own style of clothing. And it was very interesting because it was clothing that they were exporting. They took in Indian muslin and different kinds of fabric and they sent it back to their country. But for themselves, they continued to wear their own garments. And that is what we see in the 17th century. Also, what Edward Terry writes, and I quote here because I find it very interesting. For my Lord Ambassador and his company, we all kept to our English habits, made as light and cool as possible we could have them. His waiters in red taffeta cloaks guarded with green taffeta, which they always wore when they went abroad with him. Myself in a long black cassock, and the colors and fashions of our garments were so different from theirs that we need not, wheresoever we were, to invite spectators to take notice of us. And he writes very interestingly about, different styles of clothing, etc. But slowly we do see a change. And here my argument in my thesis has been that menswear is highly influenced by politics and technology. So Indians at that time were very strong. And looking at the kind of jamas and clothes that the Indian rajas, rulers, rich merchants, the kind of clothes they wore, we see a lot of British men, well, not a lot, but quite a few British men adopt that style. They start wearing the jamas, as you can see this picture of Captain Hook, and they have the best block printed muslin fabrics, and people call them nabob, at that time because of the word nawab is anglicized to nabob. And we read about the white nabobs, also written by William Dalrymple. And but usually what we see in the 18th century, again, I have this elite in English or European man's dress. It starts as a three-piece suit. The waistcoat, the coat, and the breeches are there, and wigs, etc. But a lot of the people who settle in India, the Europeans who begin to settle in India, they marry Indian women, because what we see is women are not coming to India at that point in time. It's only the men who come. So they come here, they marry, they settle here, they start living like rajas. And because they're all traders, they have good relations with Indian traders, and they form good bonds, good friendships, and this begins to happen. But slowly, as we see, okay, so yeah, in 18th century, again, because of this trading, etc., which happens, slowly it is realized that land holdings and soldiers will be needed, because, they were not always granted license to trade. And I don't want to get too much into history, want to focus on clothing, but still it's very important for us to know what happened at that point in time. So in 1757, a Battle of Plassey takes place. It is won by the British, and East India Company recruits soldiers, and a new phase begins. Now the Mughals start getting weaker and the British start getting stronger, and they start gaining foothold in the country. And slowly what we see is that the British start imposing their rules and regulations in the country. But still, we do see two different styles of dressing up. Indians have their own style and the Europeans have their own style. But slowly, because now they start recruiting soldiers, and military uniform here becomes very important. They start recruiting soldiers, and they make friends with different rajas, and they give them orders that this is how people should dress up. So I'm going to read something here that I found in a file, in a government file from 1790 at the National Archives in New Delhi. It says, I have to request you will inform his lordship and council that an immediate obedience was paid to his orders regarding the dress of sepoy. Sepoy in Hindi we call sipahi, which who are the soldiers. sepoys in the pay of the natives of distinction, shroffs and others who employed men of this description, etc. That, this is what they will wear, this is how they're supposed to dress up, and so on and so forth. And because the British were very good, British and French people were very good in their military strategies, etc. So the Indians started appointing them, even the Rajas started appointing them in their courts to train the military. And thus, this concept of uniforms, military uniforms, what we see Mangal Pandey wearing much later, all of this starts coming in. Now, just to give you an idea, 1757 East India Company, wins and it starts ruling. So people call that time period as Company Raj because it's the East India Company. It is not the British Crown that is ruling India. So it's called Company Raj. And in 1800 AD, there is this map to give you an idea of where the British had gained a strong foothold. And slowly what we see is by the 19th century, this is what the map looks like. So the British have a strong foothold. And of course, they are fighting the French, the Dutch, the Danes, the Portuguese. So everybody needs armies. And they recruit Indian men. And, there is a prescribed uniform. And from that, slowly, there's always, because they looked smart, they looked good. So there is a kind of a thought process where people start picking up from there. Now, again, to come back to the earlier point that I made, in terms of cut and construction, the kind of clothes that we used to wear, or the Indian men used to wear here. This is a jama, as you can see, and this is a choga. Choga is front open, but is loose. It does not have a placket and buttons and things like that. It's an overcoat. So this is, what was being worn. Slowly, from the jama, we see a lot of Persian, Turkish, Armenian, different influences have started coming into the country. There's a garment called the alkaluk. Now, why? Because I was talking about the soldiers earlier. So the British recruited soldiers who were from any part of the country or even from outside. And India, being a rich country, a lot of people would come into India, especially the Persians, Turkish, Armenians, and the British started recruiting them. And all of them formed the Indian Army. Actually, at that time, it wasn't called the Indian Army, but it was presidency based, the Madras Presidency, Bombay Presidency, Calcutta Presidency, and so on. Today, all these names have been changed. Calcutta is Kolkata, Bombay is Mumbai, and Madras is Chennai. But at that point in time, these were the main centers where the British worked. And they became very good friends with the traders. So in Bengal, we talk about Rabindranath Tagore, his grandfather was very close to the British. And in Mumbai, in Bombay, there were the Parsi community. There was a Parsi community which became, again, just like the British. And now British started exerting a kind of a different atmosphere in the country. They did not wish to be friends anymore. There were orders passed in 1810 and 1825 that people should not mix up with each other. This is the kind of clothing that they should wear. Even intermarriages became, sort of taboo. And so a lot of these things started coming in the 19th century. And in fact, it was, Indian caste system was always talked about. Now we had this new ruling caste, which were the British in India. And so what happened? They were technologically superior. They were politically superior. And they started directing what is to be worn. Now, if you look at Mughals, unlike Mughals, whatever they wore the same kind of clothes that everybody else wore. But here, there was a different class coming up. So slowly, from the army recruits, there was Skinner's army, and they wore the alkaluk. From there, slowly, there's a new garment that comes, which is called the angrakha. Now, here's a picture of more than 100-year-old angrakha, which you see here in white. It has chikankari. Chikankari is a kind of embroidery. And so the jamas were, was a fabric which was like a gown. But here in angrakha, you see there's this circular neck. There are two panels. And those two panels would be joined at the waist. There's a stitch line at the waist. And slowly, with the coming in of watches, etc., small pockets were inserted in this stitch line for people to keep their golden watches there. From the Angrakha came another garment called the chapkan, which you can see in the image next to this. And now the chapkan also again had this circular collar. Till now, we do not see anything like a sherwani. We do not see any buttons. We do not see structured tailoring. It is quite fluid, or it is the kind of tailoring which was very zero waste pattern, as we call it today, and with guzzets, etc. And also another thing interesting is that Indians usually sat on the floor. So for sitting on the floor, you need loose kind of garments. You cannot have very tight garments and sit on the floor. Many times in books, etc., you read that the British were standing till they were given chairs to sit down. And there were two, and you know, the habits and customs were very different. The Indians would take off their shoes as a mark of respect and enter a room, and the British would take off their hat as a mark of respect. So, so these things started somewhere in the early 19th century. The British Viceroy and people said that Indians should always take off their shoes as a mark of respect to us. But by then, the Indians started realizing that. And then there was a huge defiance. And in Bengal, a lot of articles came out in newspapers at that point in time. We have Emily Eden, who writes letters back home. And she says that now Indians understand and they want to wear shoes and come inside. So these little changes one can see continuously in different articles of dress. And but again, some of them started wearing by now, they started wearing the British shirts and the kind of hose or breeches that the British would wear. But we do not see a complete turning point. That comes in the later part of the 19th century and early 20th century. That is the time, because 1757, East India Company begins to rule, and 1857, we see the end of Mughal rule. And now the rule passes on to the British Crown. So it's called the British Raj after 1857. That is when Queen Victoria becomes the Empress of India. And she sort of passes a decree that we do not want people to fight with each other. Everybody, whatever areas are under the British, they are under the British. Whatever areas are under independent rulers, they are under independent rulers. We promise not to fight, and we can all be happy together. Now, that again became a golden age in the country after 1857. For a while, there were educated men coming, and as Indian civil service officers, they had their own style of dressing. Also, we see in the 1820s and 30s, British start establishing education and schools across the country. And with William Bentinck, he says that men should not dress up like peacocks. Let us wear more structured clothing, simple clothing, and effectively highly tailored. So fit becomes important, not the fabric. And this is when they set up schools, they start uniforms. And when the young boys and girls, especially the boys to begin with, girls come in much later, they start wearing shorts, trousers, shirts. And so this concept of being more European, or that being European, eating with fork and knife, copying their manners, is a better way to live. Now that starts propagating in the country in the elite section. So that is happening. And here, these are some pictures that show the transition. So from there, now this is a picture of about 1850s. And for the first time, I see, because I've gone through a lot of pictures, in the 1850s, for the first time, I see this Nawab of Jhajjar here wearing a very strange kind of garment, which has a front placket. It still has that U like an Angrakha, but it does have a front placket, and buttons start coming in like that. And you can see a foreign resident there, and other people in their jamas and shawls and very Indian Persian kind of clothing here. And his little son also sits there with the choga and a little jama. So this is the first pictorial evidence of achkan. Now this is what a new term comes in as achkan, and this is what people start wearing. So the achkan is more flowing like the jama, or the angrakha, it still has that U kind of a thing, like panels as if, but it is front open now. And the neck, as you can see, is a little raised as opposed to the earlier garments. Now, something that has really influenced is the military jackets and frock coats. So these started being prescribed, uniforms started coming in. And like I said, William Bentinck decided that people will wear simpler clothes and, black wool. And it's very strange that people in Bengal, we have a lot of Calcutta gazettes, which talk about gazetteers, which talk about the black wool coming to India and people, wearing tailored suits with black wool. Now imagine in a country that's as hot as India, people were wearing black woolen coats and trousers because they were influenced by the British. And there are lots of case studies that I've read about tailors who would come to India and within 10 years go back and create their castles back in the UK, whether it's Scotland or England or wherever, because tailoring became a very important necessity. India had its own darzis who knew how to stitch in the Mughal style. But a lot of people write about them that they could copy very quickly, very easily, and whatever was given to them, they started copying and learning. And so the Indian elite definitely looked up to the West and wanted to dress up like them. But then there comes this big challenge. There are areas that are under the British rule, but there are areas who still have, there are areas which still have Maharajas. So there's Baroda, there's Rajputana, there's Hyderabad. Now, what do these people do? They cannot dress up in the three-piece Western suit when they come and meet their subjects. So they have to have a garment which is Indian, or at least Indian looking in the mindset. And slowly, this is again about the army, that, a military department was constituted. They started taking control. It's something I've already mentioned earlier. And then, like I said, these hybrid kind of costumes started coming up. So you see that Achkan over there, and this is Maharaja Ram Singh Ji of Jaipur. He built the Albert Hall here, to welcome Prince Albert. And he's the one who, reworked on Jaipur to make it look pink. And so it was called the Pink City. It's still called the Pink City. Now you see this strange mix of garments happening. So these people, they do not wear jamas anymore. They wear these buttoned waistcoats, which in Hindi or in other colloquial languages known as vaskat, which is a corrupt form of the word waistcoat. And then there's a coat, but we haven't reached the Sherwani yet. But he still wears these kind of garments as a kind of trouser. But because they're used to wearing, the patkas or the waist belts, so there's a lot of fabric there. And then, of course, shoes and very Victorian looking tables. So these things start coming up. If you look at the earlier paintings of Maharajas, they're either sitting on the floor or they're standing up. There are no chairs. So chairs start coming into India, into the households of the rich, elite. All of this starts coming in slowly. And it's all connected to the evolution of Sherwani. So that was 1860s. This is further around 1880s. We see, the first picture is that of Raja of Baroda, and the second one is the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad. Now, the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad, again, Jaipur, like I said, Baroda, Hyderabad, these are all independent principalities, and they are rich. They start, their parents, the rulers, want them to learn English and French and their customs and costumes. And so this is how slowly we see the change in style, in language of the Indian princes, because everybody now looks to the West. There are, if you look at their the photographs of that time period, there is Belgian crystal that's coming in, everything which apes a lot of the West. But then there is always, when they meet their own subjects, there's a willingness to be Indian at heart at the same time, and to wear very Indian looking clothes. For the first time, we see this kind of a garment, which can be called a Sherwani. So this is again the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad with Archduke of Vienna. And this the picture has been taken in 1884. And it is the first evidence of a kind of Sherwani with this kind of collar. Later, it becomes just the high collar. And then after this picture, I found a lot of Sherwanis. I went to Hyderabad. I saw in the museums there and also in Delhi and Aligarh and Lucknow and other places that the Sherwani to begin with had this different collar. And within about 20 years or so, it took up the standing collar. So in the later part of 19th century and early 20th century, we do see Sherwanis with, this Peter Pan kind of a collar and different collars. But now what was different in the Sherwani or the frock coat or the other coats was that in the Indian style of garment, the Sherwani, first of all, it was definitely, the pattern is of a European style. The sleeves are satin sleeves, unlike the choga or anything else. There is a front placket. A Sherwani has 7 buttons. And after the 7 buttons, it is open. And when it opens up, it caters to people sitting on the floor because there's an extra flap of fabric that goes inside and is tied inside. And that is called a balabar. Balabar was also a type of garment that was worn earlier. So it is. So now they came up with this new garment, which was not British, but because in a lot of letters and diaries and things I've read, that the British would always think that Indian men dress very effeminately. Why effeminately? Because they wore those kind of gowns, muslin gowns for them. They appeared like that. Now the men wanted to dress up not effeminately, but like politically superior men. So they wanted to wear something which is very tailored, very structured, but not entirely copied from the West. And thus we see the birth of the Sherwani. This is also the time when practical guides for stitching, tailoring start coming on the scene. And earlier, people would just look at a person, start, measure and work. But now here you have complete paper patterns. Mr. Vincent starts prescribing these patterns across. Indian tailors go abroad to learn tailoring and come back. And also what we see is that there are a lot of foreign tailors who are settled in, at that point in time, were settled in Shimla and Calcutta. And you see ads in newspapers, and they could stitch for anyone. It wasn't that they would only stitch for the British, because Indian royalty had a lot of money. So they were happy to stitch for the royalty. And here I just have these 3 images to show that this is what a choga, these are just my line drawings to show that what a choga looked like, what a Sherwani looks like, and what a frock coat was like. And also these patterns, which are from 1920s and 1940s. So here you can see that there's a pattern of a frock coat and a pattern of a Sherwani. Again, very sort of similar kind of thought processes. Now, frock coat has a seam at the waist, which was there in the achkan. So a lot of people, when they have this thing about achkan and Sherwani, achkan usually had a waist seam, but later that seam was lost and they started stitching the complete garment like that. Now, Abdul Sharar has been was an author from Lucknow, and what he writes is that the achkan was extremely popular in Lucknow, and he gives credit to Lucknow for starting of achkan. And what he says is that achkan was extremely popular, and the style started to find its way from towns to villages. In a very short time, it was worn throughout India. In Hyderabad, it developed with a few alterations into the Sherwani. Its sleeves were made like those of the English coat. The adornments over the chest were discarded, and for the lower part, the shape of English overcoat was adopted. It became so popular everywhere, including Lucknow, that it is now the national dress of all Hindus and Muslims in India. And this he writes in the early part of the 20th century. So what we see is, till there was Mughal rule, there is no Sherwani. Mughal rule ends in 1857. And after that, we see these hybrid costumes coming in. And then towards the end of 19th century, we see these new garments like Sherwani, like achkan and Sherwani come up. And very interestingly, I see Sherwani branching into 2. One is the elite educated Sherwani. The other is the Raja Maharaja fancy Sherwani. So this is how the two styles evolve. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the first president of independent India, writes a letter to Mr. Nehru, who was the prime minister, and he says that it would be very much appreciated if there was something distinctive in the dress of the president. The idea was that I should wear a black or gray achkan and churidar pajama. Personally, you know, I'm the last person to have any such opinion in such matters. I would like to be guided by you. So India had moved from a governor general model to a presidential model of government. And the first president had to set the trend. He did not want it to be regional or religion or something like that. So something new had to come up. And what was in vogue at that time was this achkan or sherwani. So the first president of India and the first prime minister of India started wearing this garment to show its importance, its elegance. And that is how eventually it becomes the national costume of India. Also, what we see is in the West, the collar starts now to be known as the Nehru collar or the Nehru dress. And the Beatles wear it and so on and so forth. And we see a lot of things happening around the Nehru collar. Interestingly, this collar was not Indian at all. When I researched, I found that it comes from the military of the Prussian army coats to begin with. But these are all interesting small little details, how they came together and how the British influenced Indian men to wear more tailored outfits. And then we see this coming in independent India. Similarly, this is a picture taken of the entire cabinet in the 1950, on 26th of January 1950. And when the Indian Constitution was put forth. And here again, we see everybody wearing, achkan or sherwani and variations of the same. So as I just mentioned, today we see two types of sherwanis. One is the elite educated type of sherwani. The other is elite royal type of sherwani worn in marriages today. Today, of course, the pattern has changed. They just pick up anything. It's not fitted. It may be fitted, may not be fitted. They just adorn it with a lot of embroidery, with lots of fancy stuff, and it starts looking like a sherwani. But the true sherwani, we still have the true sherwani from the early, their families from the early 20th century. And when I went and interviewed them, they confirmed the fact. In fact, it's only the tailors who knew that, yes, it has a British influence on the entire outfit. Neither the historians nor the designers, nobody really had thought about it like that. So I'm happy to say, finally, I was able to solve the mystery and to figure out how this Indian national dress evolved. This is a comparison chart for people who are in fashion history, interested in fashion history. They can see the difference between cut, length, the kind of collar, chest fitting, waist buttons, etc. I don't think we have the time to go in the details, so I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. I hope, yes, I'm well in time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Toolika, for such a fascinating presentation and such meticulous research. It's really a model of a focus through history, looking at a particular garment. It does reveal, I guess, this idea that no culture is complete to itself, that we often draw on other cultures, particularly when it comes to how we mark elitism, because we need something distinct, and often it's a foreign culture that provides that. And so it's very interesting. And we have a little bit of time left if there are any questions. Lokesh, of course, please feel free.
So thank you, Toolika. The presentation was amazing, full of very interesting details, even making you think about how we sit on the floor, and that becomes very important for what is the style of clothing, whereas sitting on the chair. So my question was regarding the word sherwani, because sher also means tiger. So is there any relationship and what is how the word came?
Yeah. I'm so glad that you asked this question, because this question in my thesis has been left unanswered. I found a lot of things related to it, which I'll share with you. So what I found is that Sherwan is a place in Iran from where a lot of fabric used to come to India. And when I read Akbar's Ayn-e Akbari, there's the term Sherwani for fabric that was coming from Iran, but it's not a garment. And then when I went to Aligarh, I saw the name Sherwani written outside many houses because I had gone to meet an ex-vice chancellor of Aligarh, because Aligarh, they all wear those Sherwanis in Aligarh Muslim University, and here in Mayo College they wear that Achkan Sherwani. So I went around asking people. So I went there and I got to know that a lot of people had migrated from there and they use their name as Sherwani. The surname is Sherwani. So now, where did this garment come from? Probably, I don't know, I randomly, I think probably either the person who stitched the garment for the Nizam in Hyderabad, he was a Sherwani, or, the fabric that was used was Sherwani, had come from Sherwan in Iran. That is why Sherwani. So there are these multiple loose ends. I haven't been able to tie it yet. God willing, I might be able to find the answer to it. I don't want to say anything randomly, but I have researched enough to try and find out, why is it called the Sherwani? And the closest is that a lot of people from Sherwan, and they were good tailors also. And I visited Nizam's wardrobe in Hyderabad. He has the biggest wardrobe in Asia. And there is so much fabric and all of that kept there, and how he had Western suits and Indian suits, etc., etc. But I couldn't really pinpoint. So I, being a researcher, I just don't want to say anything till I can really pinpoint it that yes, this is the reason why it was called Sherwani. So yeah, it's unanswered yet.
Thank you. I wonder also if you might comment on the contemporary use of the Sherwani. I think it's quite interesting to look at, say, something like
Yes.
Xi Jinping in China, where the Mao suit evolved as being the national dress and worn by leaders, by chairman of the party. But now we find that Xi Jinping has reverted back to the business suit. We very rarely see him in a Mao jacket, which might be a bit disappointing for a country that tries to present itself as an alternative to the West, but shows how powerful the suit is. Yet in India, someone like Modi, Narendra Modi, is very distinct in terms of his use, and I presume it's Sherwani that he's wearing. Is that right? Have you tracked what Modi has been wearing?
Yes. So he in winters usually they wear this Sherwani, which is complete here. But after independence, a few things changed, and the Sherwani, instead of wearing the entire Sherwani, they started wearing the sleeveless kind of a jacket, which the stand-up collar. And interestingly, in India, it's also called the Chinese collar. A lot of people call it Chinese collar, as you just mentioned. But then you see the Chinese collar has a collar, and then there is a slant here with some buttons also sometimes. So it is quite interesting, and that is why I wanted to find out the exact origin of the stand-up collar. So which comes from, as I see, from the Prussian army uniform. And regarding what Mr. Modi wears right now, he is a person, people look up to him, and they want to dress up like him, whether they like him or they hate him, whatever it is. But a lot of the kind of dressing, you see now in India, a lot of news readers try and wear clothes like he wears. And so he does wear the Sherwani a lot, but he also wears the shorter version of the Sherwani. He also wears the Western suits and a variety of things. So, but yes, the Sherwani continues, and it is there to last. It will continue now. That is what I feel. It has become a status symbol. Every wedding in India, whether it's authentic Sherwani or not, but even if the cut is just like a loose kurta, but all the embroidery and the front buttoning makes it look like, ready for the groom. So this is how it has become now. Yeah.
And are there any issues with the production of the Sherwani in terms of the skills? Have there been any technologies that have been introduced to mechanize a lot of the embroidery, for instance, so that there is a change in the kind of the craft attached to the tailoring of the Sherwani?
See, the tailoring of the Sherwani is a very specific craft, as I realized. You know, uh, they even iron the back of the fabric they literally sculpt it. You know, that is how it used to be made, but it's not made like that anymore because people don't wear it so religiously. They want to wear it just for an occasion or two, except for maybe the politicians or people from very, again, elite families. You know, they take that kind of pain and effort for fittings, etc. But usually people just buy it off the shelf. Now there are brands that just sell sherwanis for weddings. And yeah, so it's become very, very popular now that we see. Designers, some of the designers are very particular, not all. So I can't really say that this is what it is today, but largely the elite continue, especially in Rajasthan, in Hyderabad, Aligarh. People are very specific about their achkans and sherwanis and the buttons and everything. But that's not the case with the rest of the country. So yeah, and in fact in Pakistan also people wear that. So because it's the entire Indian subcontinent, it's not just India, I would say.
Lokeshji, I think you've got something to say.
So
I know that
one more
your study of
question I have for you,
Kiriyun,
Toolika.
for instance, is a very interesting comparison to the Sherwani. Do you have something to ask or like to
Yes,
share?
I want to ask something, then also share since you mentioned about the Cadian. So are there any studies regarding the making of Sherwani? I'm very curious, Tolika. Are there any publication which talks about its making?
No, I have not come across any publication. But I did this research by talking to tailors, by getting patterns made. It is there in my thesis. And now that my book is coming out, and I'm happy to see Himanti ji is here. She's from the publishing house, from South Asia Publishers. And so, yeah, um, there is no prescribed, much later. In the 1940s, we do see, you know, this pattern book, which I shared with you. This book was shared to me by, currently she's the Dean of NIFT, Professor Vanna Narang. She had this with her and she shared it with me for my thesis. And then I saw that, okay, these, you know, these paper patterns started coming in. This is how it is to be. But when I spoke to the Raymond's team and the tailors who do sherwanis, and then in Aligarh, you know, to the tailors who stitch for the president. So these people, they told me that it has to be first made on a rough muslin, and then the waist is literally sculpted, like how you see Rajendra Kumar's movies in the 1950s and 60s. If you look at the back, you know, it's really sculpted with the fabric. But today that's not done anymore. So I think tailoring as a craft is also not really well documented in India. All other crafts people work around, you know, as embroidery and weaving, etc., etc. But tailoring, I think, also needs to be looked at as a craft, and there's a lot of work around it. Hand seams, roll seams, so on and so forth, which luckily, being a director of the Indian Institute of Crafts and Design, we are able to do, trying to preserve that. But yeah, it's a very, very small effort as of now.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lokesh, for that. And thank you very much, Toolika. I'm very pleased that the Indian Institute of Craft, represented by yourself, is part of the consortium of the Knowledge House for Craft, because it lends a very important perspective into the understanding of craft and its diversity, and reminds me of the research in SEPT with Jai Thakkar, looking at the vernacular furniture of Gujarat, which shows how our sense of the default furniture of the table and chairs is a very Western-centric idea. And there are other kinds of furniture. And as you say, this has an implication in terms of the dress that people wear as well, and the innovation of this hybrid Western-Eastern jacket, which enables people not just to sit on the chair very elegantly, but also on the floor as well, is a very important contribution to that. So thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for this. And we look forward to promoting the book, where people can read this in great detail and learning of your future research. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody else for attending today, and stay
Thank you.
tuned for future talks in Reinventing the Wheel.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.